people the world over broadly desire the same thing, which is economic security, family well-being, hope and promise, for their children, which comes typically through the form of access to schooling and quality schooling, and health, to bring all that together.
So welcome to the It's Never About Money community. I am joined by a very, very important guest, and a guest that I'm really excited to have a chat to, Darian Clark, who is the CEO of CUFA. And I might just read Darian's bio just quickly. He's got a wealth of experience, actually 20 years of development experience in the Asia Pacific, working in the Timor region, 2009-2011, Afghanistan, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands, across various sectors, including governance, economic development, and emergency response. And Darian's current capacity is as the CEO of the financial inclusion NGO, the Credit Union Foundation of Australia, or CUFA, as we like to call it, driving a dynamic program portfolio across the Asia Pacific to support the economic development and resilience of disadvantaged communities. Darian, I know we have tried to make this work on several occasions, and today we've taken about half an hour to troubleshoot, but we are finally here. And I know we did a whole episode before and it didn't work out, but that's been a first for all of us. But we are so excited to have you on, Darian, and welcome.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe. Look, I like to say that if development was easy, it would have happened a long time ago. And look, I admire our persistence and our tenacity.
I agree.
Yeah, but I think we've got some important messages to get out there, and we've overcome the IT odds.
Yeah, and I think there's no better and more patient person than you to bumble my way through technology, Darian. So I appreciate your patience on that. So Darian, as a starting question, I mean, you're a very bright man. You've got a heap of experience. Why not the private sector? Why the NGO space? What brought you to having this sort of background? What's your background to having this sort of passion in this particular space? Yeah.
Oh, well, Joey, look, flattery will get you everywhere. I don't know if you can see the blushing on the camera, but,
we have a high-resolution camera.
Keep the compliments flowing. How have I ended up here? Look, I guess I was brought up, steeped, in a family with very strong social justice values. My father, in a volunteer capacity, was the president of the South Australian chapter of the Red Cross. So as a very young boy, I would, after school, I'd be dragged along. At the time, that's how I'd describe it. But now, the benefit of hindsight, of course, I was presented the opportunity to join Red Cross board meetings. And so from a very young age, I guess I became aware of the larger world, and this is in Adelaide, where I was being brought up. It's quite a middle class community, relatively well off, but Adelaide has this sort of interesting infusion of concern and care for others and others' well-being. So through the 10 years, my dad was in that role, and also his day job. I mean, he was a magistrate in the youth court, and on occasion as well, I would also go to court and watch proceedings as well as a young person. So look, you could say it was quite a unique upbringing where I was exposed, even though I was in a very, professional middle class. Both parents worked, in well-paid jobs. I benefited from my parents' support to put me through an incredible private school, Pembroke. But again, the school as well very much had an outward-looking posture.
Okay.
About how we can help others, and disadvantaged and marginalised. So even though it was a very sheltered, a very kind of protected environment I grew up in, just had this burning desire to do something,
I'm
for
interested
the
in
wider
that burning
world.
desire because you could be forgiven, in the sort of bubble that exists. You could be forgiven for not actually um, feeling the resonance with the global issues that are occurring. So is it a fact, the mere fact that as a child you were exposed to the issues which allowed you to actually contemplate and develop an empathy for the issues that are broadly faced, um, globally? Because again,
Mm.
CUFA, the organisation that you're CEO and champion, is really about not looking at sort of domestic borders, but going further and globally addressing some issues that are obvious. When
Mm.
a lot of people would say, let's focus on the issues at home first. So it's interesting to sort of look back at your background and go, well, why do you feel so passionate about doing what you're doing globally?
Yeah, I mean, I think to come back to the sort of that Red Cross example, I mean, the Red Cross, it has a very strong domestic
Yep.
presence, and
Yep.
focus, on displaced families, from bushfires or floods. Also, a lot of work with Indigenous communities. And I accompanied my dad, and spent quite some time, in the Indigenous communities in the northern part of South Australia.
Yeah. Right.
So for me, I guess I mean, this idea of the domestic international, those borders, yeah, I guess in some ways I've always seen a very a continuity of issues. How we work and help marginalised people and communities in Australia or in the Pacific. It's degrees of difference, say,
Mm, mm, mm.
rather than being a wholly different universe.
So you're using skills potentially that could have been acquired domestically to actually help
Yeah,
internationally.
yeah. I guess, and actually, in my very early career,
Mm.
um, uh, I actually was working in the domestic social policy space.
Okay.
I was with Family and Community
Yeah.
Services.
Right.
So even though I did a degree, in international development and international economics, for the first 5 years or so, I was working in some incredible sort of initiatives, working on housing, social housing
Mm,
reforms
mm,
between the Commonwealth and the state,
mm,
early childhood
mm,
education
mm,
reforms, as well. So
mm,
I guess, it's treating the human on their merits. And I always come back to a very simple principle, which is people the world over broadly desire the same thing,
mm,
which is economic security,
mhm,
family well-being,
mhm.
hope and promise, for their children,
Yes.
which comes typically through the form of access to schooling and quality schooling,
Yes.
and health, to bring all that together.
Well, yeah, yeah. I think Darian, there's, I've one of the themes and the central themes of the podcast is this idea that it's never about money, but as a pillar of it's never about money, is the actually honoring the idea that in order for it to be for it not to be about money, one must consider that basic sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, sort of safety and physiological needs are actually dealt with and addressed. And we previously had a very interesting person by the name of Nick Marchese from Orange Sky, who
Mm,
runs a charity that helps people experiencing homelessness. And one of the themes around that episode was really, what does a minimum means of survival actually mean? And, you know, what issues are they trying to address as a result of these individuals not having a lot of money? What level of financial resourcing is required to meet their minimum means of survival? So I think in bringing you on, Darian, really I want to address some of these particular issues and what social issues are trying to be addressed in our neighbouring region, such as Papua New Guinea.
mm. Yeah, look, it all resonates, um, and we know in the sort of current Australian context, there's a lot of hardship, And there's that notion charity starts at home. How much concern do we have for communities overseas relative to the home? Yeah, I don't think it's a dichotomy. There's a lot of layers to the support available within Australia. A lot of charity work and charity dollars do stay, within Australia. And then, further to that, we do have sort of reasonable sort of social welfare systems, at a federal and national and state level. And I'm speaking here, drawing on my lived experience for 5 years, in helping to design and deliver this. And I, a very proud early initiative I was a part of was developing some of the early psychological supports for people on welfare benefits, recognizing that, and your point around homelessness, a lot of people homeless often present with mental health issues. And so trying to understand, rather than deal with symptoms, root causes. And so, we sort of piloted a lot of that in the early 2000s, a lot of mental health access for people. It was then, I think, called New Start.
Okay. Yep.
Allowance.
Yeah. New Start. Yep. And could you give us maybe a bit of a descriptor summary of what CUFA is actually, what CUFA does, and what problems it's trying to solve for?
Yeah, for sure. So most charities, and particularly the larger charities, have wide-ranging agendas. CUFA, we're relatively small, but I like to think that just as a buzzing bee around your head or a pebble in your shoe, small doesn't equate to impact. And we do punch above our weight, in the region, because we know what our business is, which is financial literacy and enterprise development. And we find an incredible unmet demand when we offer and engage with communities in these two respects, and on a pretty tight sort of budget. We're not, don't have sort of large or sprawling kind of overheads or admin. There's a grand total of 3 of us in Australia, and 20 staff sort of overseas in Papua New Guinea and Bougainville. We've reached thousands of people through our work. And we have this sort of 3-pillar approach. We call it earn, save, and invest, which for us constitutes the basis, the premise for people to build long-term economic or financial well-being.
Yeah, because it's good and well and for us to say in, where we are in our privileged society and position, to say it's never about money. But the reality of it is somewhat about money in the areas that you're spreading the financial literacy word. So you're actually sitting there and educating those around concepts of money. What social impact does that have? Like, can you give us some tangible examples about how that can actually change lives?
So when we say, I guess, it's never about money, there we're tapping into the idea of this sort of blind accumulation, of wealth.
Yes.
And I would say when we talk about poverty or money in a Papua New Guinea or Cambodian context, I like to conceive of it around access to capital,
Yes.
access to seed funding.
Yes.
There is such an entrepreneurial spirit, which comes up against a range of barriers to enable and catalyze, that desire. And so CUFA works, if you like, as that bridge. We give people skills, how to run a business, the tools. We give them some seed capital. And then we give them sort of long-term sort of mentoring and support. So look, we know that small business is always, if you like, it's the ultimate act of passion. You put body and soul into it. And it doesn't always succeed. But we like to, the people, the communities or the individuals we work with, we do everything within our sort of remit to help them succeed. So we test market ideas. We, help them explore. We allow for failure and to pick them back up, put them on their 2 feet, to keep going. And there's that sort of balance between the perspiration and the inspiration here. And you find, like, in some of these cultures, like we work particularly with women entrepreneurs because there can be quite a culture, of chauvinism that women aren't up to the task or they shouldn't be doing certain things. And so, again, we help to overcome some of those mental or cultural barriers as we describe them. And so, that's kind of the recipe, if you like, the ingredients of what we do. And I guess complementing that is providing access to bank accounts and digital payment platforms. Look, it's hard to imagine, where we sit, the sort of the scale here, but, you have 2.2 billion people who are, living below the poverty line globally. The US $2.15, 1.5 billion are offline. They don't have access to any kind of online features, which I know is hard for us in a day-to-day sense to even grasp, right? Given how much we live and breathe in the virtual world. And then 800 million people are unbanked. 800 million adults don't have any kind of access to a banking system. So how do you talk about saving, and building saving habits and cultures and investing, and then money management? And so we try to give a comprehensive approach. And so it's incredible. Like, we help these budding micro entrepreneurs, they register their businesses because trying to sort of navigate those bureaucratic pathways is difficult. So we smooth that process. We have partners in Papua New Guinea and Cambodia. So we bring the bank to them. We get them to sign up, without having to queue for a day. And then, and something where we're looking to engage more and roll out more is around digital sort of platforms. And look, there's different in Cambodia. It's perhaps more advanced than it is in Papua New Guinea, but we're hoping to be more active in this space as well, so that can be, because a lot of people live in rural, remote areas, not in the big cities. So they can't access branches of banks, and they don't have the time, and there's no roads or means to get into those big cities.
So I see this sort of micro sort of lending business opportunity side as being, I suppose, in some ways, a pretty direct intervention, whereas you do some work with primary school children in being able to provide them with some financial literacy, and also, just talking to you around your movement into sort of adolescent space and helping them with career development and so on, which I see as more of a longer term game, but ultimately almost possibly more of a game changer over the longer term. So, could you talk to us about those programs that you're running and how financial literacy really does improve outcomes?
So and I think it's quite unique what we offer. I'm not aware of, I guess, any others who go into school classrooms and directly deliver financial literacy for children.
Yes.
We've got a sort of 6-lesson plan. And then further to that, we then work with the teachers and we empower them to deliver our curriculum. And what that means is that we don't have to keep returning each year to the same schools, same kind of grade. But over time, we can spread the footprint because we don't want to own this knowledge. We want to share this knowledge. This isn't about ownership. It's about dissemination. And look, for us, I mean, our larger goal here is how we can work with national departments of education to integrate and include this kind of material into school curriculum, into national curriculum.
Yes.
We just completed at the end of last year this very work in Cambodia, and we piloted for grades 4 and 7. So we prepared sort of new sort of curriculum to be included formally, such that teachers who are trained, through our programs, are then empowered by the Department of Education for this to be formally delivered in the sort of day-to-day, school curriculum. And we're currently exploring how we can replicate this, do something along these lines in the Papua New Guinea context. So linking systemic change to individual level or classroom level sort of change. So that full spectrum, if you like, how does change happen? Well, it's everything that's nothing. It starts with one step, but you need to have a sense of what the ultimate destination is as well.
And do you get a sense? Do you get a sense that, I mean, you're getting traction there with, I mean, you are getting traction with a certain system within PNG, but are you getting, do you feel like the vision is to try to get through to the public system as well? Because I believe you deal with private schools in the financial literacy education space, but my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's harder to get traction in the more public system, or it might be even more for a security risk. I'm not sure. PNG is a very unique place, a beautiful place, but a very unique place and has its own challenges. So perhaps you can give us a bit of a picture for that and the challenges that you need to overcome.
So I guess following the pilot phase, of which you were a part,
Yep.
and it was great to go up with you and be in the classroom together. But we now that we're scaling up and getting more resources behind our children's financial literacy, we're able to have a more inclusive approach.
Okay.
So we've got sort of all nature and types of schools involved here. I guess if you were sort of to challenge me further, working presently Port Moresby, but how can we expand the footprint, the presence, outside of Port Moresby as well, to ensure that the regional parts of Papua New Guinea also benefit. And so we're exploring with some other NGO partners, how we can collaborate so that we can come in, do some intensive training in the classroom, but with a focus on the teacher capacity development as well.
It struck me as being a bit of a challenge for myself when I went down there to have a conversation, present to the primary school kids on the meaning and money situation, that the system is so different that I felt a little unnerved by the idea that we would say and talk about the concentration on what is, making sure that you have a meaningful career, that's something that you enjoy, where you can, when in a lot of situations, the reality of it is to secure a financially fruitful job is not just feeding the individual, but feeding the family and culturally helping the community. So there's a lot on the line there. What are your observations and thoughts around the difference in framing between the way we might communicate domestically versus in Papua New Guinea?
Yeah, it's a great point around cultural difference. And I guess technology has driven this in part. There's a lot of focus on your individual career aspirations, and we talk about a meaningful career. which speaks to skills, I guess, and your studies, perhaps the income that you pull, and then what kind of status emerges through that. There's more nuances and more layers in a Papua New Guinea context. As you say, a meaningful job can reasonably mean earning enough income to support your family and your wider family. And they have a very, a much broader conception of family and family responsibility than perhaps our sort of nuclear sort of conception here. But yeah, a lot of people take pride in earning, and holding down a job that can support and sustain, a wider sort of community. And, it's perhaps not quite a perspective, that we have here. And, we've touched on this separately, Joe, that donation levels to charity are in decline. It's kind of concealed because the overall amount flowing to charity is still trending up. But if you dig into it, less people, fewer individuals
I've heard this
are
on
donating.
numerous occasions, Darian, from different people. And so, yeah, I'm racking my brain as to, so active participation is effectively in decline, but the amount is actually increasing. So it almost feels like there's a kind of the idea of a wealth inequality occurring even domestically is translating into this sort of situation where, we have cost of living pressures. The old adage, look after yourself at home first before you can look after, anyone else, seems to be maybe play here. What are your thoughts on why this is actually happening?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of economic strain, and I mean, we've noticed year on year, people want to give, but they can't necessarily give. I mean, we try to counter that by providing alternative ways, for people to be active and involved. So not just through money, so through their time, particularly if they've say retired. And there's a lot of people with great experience and skills, on offer. But sadly, too, the volunteer spirit in Australia is also declining. And I think a new volunteer strategy has just been launched earlier this year. And back in wearing my old hat, when I was focused on domestic social policy, I was involved in a number of sort of volunteering initiatives, recognizing the incredible contribution it makes, an underpinning to Australian society. And I think there's a risk, of a hollowed out Australia where, with the economic pressures and reduced sort of volunteering capacity, we're at risk of losing something. That's far deeper than what a GDP figure is.
Well, so I just want to, thinking about your personal exertion as a career in this particular space, you've been able to orchestrate not only a financially viable way of running your life for your family, but also give back in that sense. So there's more than, one way to skin a cat. Is that even a good saying anymore? I'm not really sure. We all love cats.
I'm a cat lover.
Yeah, okay, that's right. Well, I'm Egyptian. Apparently, we love cats.
Don't start swinging any cats, okay?
Yeah, but like, there's many different ways that one can come at being able to give back. And, one of the things that I keep seeing as a recurring theme in the conversations that I have with pretty much everyone across the board is that there's some element of giving, whether it be giving through your own workplace to helping out the employees that you have, your family, intergenerationally, and then those outside of your direct family, and perhaps moving more into the community style of giving both time, expertise, and potentially financial resources as well. So can you talk to us about the ways that people, the modes in which people can actually help, because there is then seemingly to be some, and this is an evolved sense of selfishness, and there is some payoff that goes on when you're involved in this.
Yeah, perhaps to be a little, scientific.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's do that.
I mean, we talk about the giving versus receiving, and when we receive, or we get something we've been desperate to get, we know that we get those hormone hits, the dopamine, the oxytocin, but we know that wears off, and that wears off quickly. The giving, that's forging connection, a wider connection outside of ourself. And the reason that has a longer term health benefit, proven health benefit, is that it enables us to transcend, if you like, some of our daily concerns and worries, and give some perspective. When we just live inside our head and, look after number one, then our obsessions can be inflated and blown out of proportion, and when you're denied something, and this is where the whole keeping up with the Joneses syndrome, it's never enough, and we're endlessly competitive
Yeah.
and striving for
Yeah.
that next thing.
Yep.
And but does that constitute long-term well-being or long-term happiness? There's a universe, if you like, of possibilities or choice, that we in Australia can enjoy that perhaps aren't present, in a lot of communities, say in Papua New Guinea or Cambodia. So, what we see is not necessarily an aspiration that we can understand or relate to, but to look at it from another angle, the aspiration is, how can I, as a Papua New Guinea citizen, get this skill or this qualification to get the job in order to help my community? And that's the key difference, because when we aspire to our, high-paying job or secure job in Australia, where does the boundary fall? Is it to look after my family or my children? And that's obviously legitimate, so I don't want to sort of undermine that.
Of course. Yeah.
But there's, is that, does that enable you to move beyond some of your, some of our everyday,
Yeah.
needs and obsessions, the bigger house, the flashier car, the bigger super balance.
And what culture are you? What culture are you actually sort of providing or affording your children? Like you mentioned that, a large part of the reason that you're doing what you're doing and benefiting others, and probably having a lot of gratitude in your own situation, given what you see on a day-to-day basis, is as a result of your family upbringing and your roots in terms of the education that you went through and what was you were exposed to through your parents. And so there's an opportunity not just to impact others, but the opportunity is also to allow younger, more impressionable minds to see that the world isn't just what is happening within the four walls of their home, in rainy Melbourne today, but sometimes sunny.
Yeah, and you really hit the nail on the head there around gratitude. I think it's difficult to achieve gratitude within a strict sort of family kind of context. And there's, we've read and seen some of the inspirational stories around, migrant families to Australia, the sacrifices of parents, the way children then pursued education, and went on to achieve, amazing careers and then give back to that wider community. And I think, what's going on there is, a sense of those public goods and public benefits, which are sometimes absent, typically absent, in some, development sort of settings around safety and security, being able to go about your day-to-day sort of business or work without fear for your life. But then other things, public hospitals and schools, roads, all of that, if you like, is the blood flowing through the veins of what makes for a good society. And I think, we all, you touched on homelessness, and I think perhaps your listeners can relate to, there's a greater visibility of homeless people,
Mm,
as we move around
mm,
cities, and it presents quite an existential challenge, because an individual will be, well, what can I do to help or assist, or you know, is it all sort of meaningless or pointless? And who should be responsible, and how should we help? And engage here. And if there's something, if there's one thing, one message, I hope resonates and that your viewers take away here, is that change may be difficult, and social reform may be difficult, and sometimes we also go in reverse. Trends go in the wrong direction, and certainly poverty in our region went backwards, with COVID
mm,
impacts. And that was very disheartening, for a community, development community that had made great inroads
mm,
into lifting people out of absolute poverty.
mm,
That's extremely disheartening. So do we just throw in the towel, and say, oh, it's all beyond us and impossible?
mm.
No, we double down, we dig deep. And, the challenges are too important, the problems are too important that we can never walk away, which doesn't mean we don't, personally have to process, and grapple,
Mm.
with this, but we find ways and means to work through and overcome.
So, what are the benefits of working within the sort of global, with the global community to us, beyond our borders? Because there is again this sort of, it seems to me, and there might be some stats to sort of to justify this, but or to back this up, that
Mm,
um, the giving domestically would be more skewed towards our domestic issues than necessarily helping with global aid. What's the benefit of
mm,
if giving in a global context?
mm. Look, you do. I do think you get more bang for your buck.
Yeah.
A dollar that we deploy, in Papua New Guinea or Cambodia, it gets us further
Yeah.
than perhaps what a dollar would buy
Hmm.
here. Um, there's, there are sort of regional kind of considerations. I mean, Australia or no country exists in and of itself. We're all interconnected,
Mm.
in different ways, through the environment, through trade, through family, and historical connections. Um, a great example is that our much beloved state of origin, um, has its origin story, its founding, um, during World War II, and soldiers at the time, in Papua New Guinea, um, having sort of the first a first sort of rugby game that then became, over time, what we now know, as the New South Wales versus Queensland, um, ritual. So, just that's just sort of a very concrete example to say we we are interconnected, whether we recognize it or not, or how we acknowledge it or not. We have so many connections here, so we can't just sort of draw a neat line, in the sand and say this is where our care or concern, begins and
Mm.
ends.
So, is your biggest challenge, I suppose, bringing some form of connection to the Australian people with what's happening, um, domestically in Papua New Guinea or Cambodia, like actually bringing that narrative and that story to Australia and saying, "Hey, there's a need here. How can how can we? Oh, we know how we can help, and this is a way that we can solve for this issue."
Mm,
Because in some ways, you like many charities are looking to fund this financially as well from private donors.
yeah, no, that's true. That's true. I mean, there's also I guess the role model aspect here, because Australia is a hugely successful country, um, across a whole range, of quality of life indicators. So by being active in other countries and demonstrating Australian values, and providing opportunities, through, say, scholarships and so on, from our Australian government, for Cambodians and Papua New Guineans to study in Australia and be exposed, or through the Pacific Labour Mobility Scheme. We have, I think, 40,000 Pacific Islanders, in Australia working across different farms, and then remitting income back to their families across the Pacific. There's so many ways, in which we partner, and so this is another important aspect of that, which is being active in local communities in Papua New Guinea and Cambodia, and bringing Australia, if you like, to these communities. And I'm always struck. People are always saying, "I've never met an Australian before. Where is Australia? We want to learn more and hear more about Australia." And it's an incredible gesture, that here we are assisting vulnerable individuals and communities and trying in a small way, but a very kind of considered way, to improve their circumstances. That prompts these communities to think, what an incredible country, what a generous spirit, what amazing values Australia has. That we take a moment, and we invest thought, we invest dollars to reach out, and that's what generosity is, right? It's giving when not being asked.
And we've talked about the sort of somewhat chatted about the societal differences, and I'm quite interested thematically on this idea that whilst there seems to be sometimes a lack of money in certain communities, some areas of having a happy life seem to be, I suppose, more effective in these economies, in these countries that have less. We know that we've got internally here domestically a real amazing, healthcare system, and not perfect, but we've got a healthcare system that helps, and we can access, safe housing generally. Many Australians, unemployment is low. So from again, Maslow's hierarchy of needs sort of side of it, the lower rungs of that hierarchy seem to be met really well. We move up into the higher rungs and self-actualization and things of that nature. But the one that concerns me the most is our sense of community here. We do have community, but it seems to be a user-defined community where we choose the community that we want to be part of, and it's a little bit more fragmented than it used to be. And there's also this sort of, generally this sort of mental health sort of almost heightened issue that happens here, and I wonder whether it's part of the attention economy that we have here. I wonder whether there's any observations that you have between the systems that exist between Papua New Guinea, Cambodia even, and Australia, and what we can actually maybe adopt here or amend slightly in our lives to make it, even more have a greater sense of well-being.
I mean, the old adage of, why do we travel? And it's to reflect on our own culture and our own values.
Yes.
And, picking up my earlier point around having some perspective. I mean, we don't necessarily talk about it so much at the moment, but, the sense of a rat race. And I'd probably say nowadays, with cost of living pressures and, and people feeling that they're getting behind or falling behind, it's probably less of a race and more of a maze, the rat maze at the moment, and you don't have a sense that there's going to be, you're ever going to find the exit. And, something that hopefully, your listeners could perhaps relate to, whenever we want escapism from our rat maze, there's that symbolic image of the tropical island, the clear, crystal water, and the long, flat, white, sandy beach, and the green coconut palms, and that sort of provides this sort of out of body experience, to our sort of day to day lived reality, and it's amazing to go physically, in person. You go to coastal communities, in Papua New Guinea, who live off the land, off the marine resources, and grow and plant and subsist off what they can, from the land, and yeah, it gives you pause to reflect on what truly matters. What is it that constitutes the good life? Um, what do we need more of, and what do we need less of? And these debates don't generally happen, right? Like, you don't have election campaigns that reflect upon these things. I mean, even in a day-to-day sort of sense, there's so much of a sort of a bunker mentality and people just trying to get their head down and get through. But it's important that there is space to reflect, to ensure that whatever direction we think we've got to go in, or we ought to go in, that is actually holding true, if you like, to where you want to be, or where you want to get to. And so, look, I find, I've, lived and worked in these various developing countries, because it speaks to something in me about wanting to be in control of how I understand my needs and my values in this fantastic and wonderful Australian community setting. So, it just gives me those extra layers to reflect upon what matters, but also why it matters, and not just to get swept along. And we're so bombarded now, particularly in the social media space, and everything is at your fingertips to buy. There's all your Afterpay, buy now, pay later schemes, and credit is there, and accessible, and we're not really skilled in how to manage debt well, and so it creates all these sort of conundrums, and then one day you can kind of wake up and realize that you're boxed into a corner that you never necessarily wanted to be in.
I'm also, as we think about the societal differences and the differences in, say, the idea of community, I'm really super interested in describing for our listeners the difference between our kind of taxpayer-funded sort of welfare system, supporting, those who are aging, those that don't have enough to see out their retirement through an age pension, whereas the PNG have something starkly different, which is something called the Wontok system, which I'm not necessarily suggesting is better or worse. It's just interesting to look at the two differences, the differences between those two systems, and also to look at what philanthropy or giving is, where that sits. Is that some form of our own sort of voluntary Wontok system that we're trying to apply? So perhaps you can talk about maybe describe and explain the differences for our listeners.
So Wontok is a sort of a notion of a broad family network. So it's not quite a community, if you like, but it's not immediate family either. So it's something in the middle, and the Wontok system, if you like, is it's an organic form of welfare protection that has been practiced, emerged and practiced over centuries, where certain members of your clan or kinship who have economic success or benefit, um, you know, whether it's through a job or access to one of the few formal economy jobs, or it could be success in raising your livestock, and not having, say, disease or an environmental disaster to sort of take out your chicken or pigs. So through your success, there's a sense in which the Wontok system views that as there's an element of luck there or chance, as much as any personal sort of effort or commitment. And so it kind of hedges that to say, well, if you're benefiting this year, then you may not the next year. So you need to return some of your benefit, say your high income this year from your job, and give back to your wider family network.
Who's this mandated by, Darian? Who's it mandated by? Is it a cultural, non-legislated,
all culturally derived, and if you like, enforced. These norms.
How so?
Well, they're very strong.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of pressure. And so, I don't want to necessarily cast this, in a judgmental way, right? A positive and negative light. But yeah, you'd receive a lot of attention to give back and to share and to distribute resources. And it's sort of something, Joe, that, you and I sort of grapple with, because when we're talking about financial literacy, saving money and using that to invest, then, it can be challenging because people expect you to share your income, and they can view, if you hold back some of that income, they can view that in a very negative way. You're not conforming with those cultural expectations.
Yeah, and like the pros of it obviously are quite clear. The pros of it are quite clear. There would be some sort of meaning associated with being able to assist your family broadly, sense of satisfaction that you're in a position to be able to do so. But the idea that you were able to put yourself in that position and that was somewhat chance, that sort of notion itself is one that, I personally know that a lot of people that are actually have had economic success, it's not necessarily just chance. It may be somewhat some chance, but there's a lot of hard work that often can go into that, and compromise and so on. So that idea or that notion, the worry is that breeds a bit of mediocrity in or a lack of motivation to actually excel. The idea that it's chance makes it sound so. So there's kind of like there's some pros and cons, I suppose, with the system, and like with our own system, if we look at that as well. Again, there are potentially flaws as well with that. We can be sometimes don't know whether this is correct or not, but it's seen as a bit selfish as well. And in our own right, looking to accumulate for the sake of accumulation itself, when there are others in our family that potentially need some assistance, but the government said it'll look after them, so we don't need to do anything about it. And so there's these kind of all of these sort of pros and cons, and I suppose not every system, no system's going to be perfect.
True. Yeah. I guess what I try to introduce into these sort of discussions and reflections is how a longer term perspective can play out. Because, within your one talk, if you can explain by holding back some money, some saving, using that to, say, invest in your business and grow it, you're expanding the pie. and that will be of larger benefit over time. And something we grapple with, we take it for granted again in an Australian society. I mean, we all now, superannuation is all legislated. So from the day you start work, you're saving for something you'll access in 40 years, or 50 years time. I mean, that is sort of unprecedented really in human history, because typically your lifespan, average life expectancy was very short. And your needs were far more immediate.
Yeah.
And so, we have all these amazing, sort of products, insurance, things to extend and promote and underpin a long, and good life. So a lot of this is still emerging, in a context like Papua New Guinea. And so if you like, when we introduce financial literacy, what there is cultural aspects to what we're engaging with. And that's to say, look over the horizon a little, and start to map out, what a pathway looks like to over time build your economic well-being, for you, your household, your wantop. And so we're giving some tools for people to then engage, because we know that culture is, a river with many tributaries. And so we're introducing a new tributary here so that river, can go further down. And so we don't we understand and we work with the culture, as it presents, but then there's also scope, to shape and steer and influence. And I think taking some of those positives or strengths of the Wontok system, combining it with some of the positive or strengths, if you like, of some of the modern economic opportunities, particularly through digital means that are available. I mean, that's what I see as, as a really compelling fusion, a kind of a hybrid Wontok.
So on that hybrid Wontok idea, would, as an example of that, be rather than just providing income subsidization to certain family members, could you not enforce it or provide it in the form of education for those individuals, or micro business opportunities, or other bits within the family that potentially allow them in and of themselves to be able to advance their own families? Or is that not? I mean, that might not be happening now, but is this an idea that is could potentially work, or is that not how it works?
So, as much as we sort of bemoan now, politics and bureaucracies in Australia, dare I say it, there's a measure of accountability, and measure of transparency. And unfortunately, the political settings are more strained,
Sure.
In Papua New Guinea or Cambodia. And so access to state resources, it doesn't translate into better public services automatically, or through any sort of deliberate sort of design. And so look, there are high performing schools, there are less performing schools and non-performing schools. Some of it can hinge, right, on.
So you're saying so you're basically saying even if you give money to these, a family member has had economic success, gives money for the purposes of education, that's not a surefire way that person will actually get some economic advantage out of that. That's what you're trying to tell me?
Exactly. I mean, whether they can find and access a school that can offer, quality.
So this is coming back, Darian, to your whole conversation about why CUFA exists, to actually improve the standards within these schooling systems as well, right?
Correct. Yeah, that's why we need a grounding, in the classroom settings, the lived reality, like teachers, school administrators. We can't talk about or engage in sort of changing the national school curriculum without having that strong grasp.
Makes sense.
Of what the day-to-day school system is like. and all this comes. You've got to tackle poverty in a multifaceted and multidimensional way. And look, I learned that my first year out of university when I was working, family community services. There's no silver bullet. Every individual, presents, with different needs, and to design a system that can understand, respond, and tailor to meet those needs is incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult. And so, we take a particular sort of dimension to what, to our work, focusing around the economic needs, and understanding the drivers of poverty, and how we can, deal with some of those root causes. But then we also we leverage a whole range of partnerships, recognizing, we don't do health, we don't do broader education work, we don't build roads, but of course that all comes into play, for larger sort of societal benefit. So you harness your comparative strengths, and also we try to sort of do a lot of advocacy within the development community, about how how we can all do better with the resources available, and make sure that we never rest on our laurels.
And so just nearing the end of our conversation, I'm just thinking about, there's been obviously a very clear need for resources and change in our neighbouring regions, and this is what CUFA looks to solve. One of the issues that CUFA has, of course, is being the lack of participation. Not just CUFA, but so many other charitable organisations facing a decline in participation. So, how do families get involved? How, if this conversation has resonated with someone listening here, for the benefits to their children, for the benefits to their family life, for a sense of meaning, to the impact that it has on the actual issues that are faced globally, like, how do they get involved?
So you're always welcome to reach out to us. info@cufa.org.au, or our website, cufa.org.au, and you'll find there's a drop down sort of box. You can offer. We always welcome volunteers. We have a lot of volunteers across sort of Australia. So you don't need to be based, in Sydney. Remote and virtual is all highly valued. And you can also, if you want to open the wallet as well, we're very transparent about what your level of support, can translate into on the ground. And we're also happy to sort of facilitate sort of in-country visits as well. We run an annual study tour for one of our big corporate supporters. We love connecting people with the work that we do. So we don't want blank checks.
It's like a small, smaller, more bespoke charity. One of the benefits of actually working with a smaller bespoke charity is you get to be more hands-on and on the ground, and involved.
That's right.
So it doesn't necessarily just always have to be financial backing, but also volunteerism is possible, not just with CUFA, but just broadly. Finding the issue that pulls at your heartstrings and actually targeting a bespoke charity that actually deals with that is a strategy that can work.
That's right. And look, we're not in the marketing business. Look, development is a messy, tricky, frustrating, but ultimately fulfilling enterprise. So, we give the warts and all, on this. So, change, can often, one step forward, two back, three forward. And so, if you want to learn more and be, involved with us, we also offer you, a learning journey at the same time.
And I think importantly as well on the It's Never About Money website, CUFA are very prominent. We have the publication that we talked about with the Meaning versus Money for Kids booklet that was taught in PNG is also available for people to download there. It's also a blog that I wrote on my learnings in PNG and what occurred, and what I learnt from that experience, which was a lot, is the answer in summarized fashion. So there's lots of information on the It's Never About Money website and resources as well there. So look, Darian, we got there in the end, didn't we? And I've loved every moment of it. It's such an enjoyable conversation to have. I think it really, again, centers around this idea of, what does financial security actually mean? What does it mean to have a community? What does it mean to be altruistic and to give? And how does it benefit those that are the recipients of the gifts, but also ourselves in terms of what benefits it gives us? I think it's been a really illuminating conversation, and I very much appreciate you spending the time troubleshooting with me at the start of the episode. And again, love all of your work, and may CUFA live long and prosper.
Thanks. Love a good Star Trek.
Yeah, why not? Why not?
Off.
I don't watch too much of it these days, but yeah, why not?
Definitely. No, look, thanks. Great opportunity to talk. It's always good just to hit pause as well, take stock of things. I've really, really enjoyed this experience.
Good on you, Darian.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.